Dawn came slowly to Thermopylae on the third day of the battle. Smoke drifted above the narrow pass, and the ground showed the strain of 2 days of fighting. Greek shields were dented, spear shafts had broken, and many soldiers were exhausted. Yet the most dangerous news did not come from the Persian army in front of them. Before sunrise, scouts and messengers reported movement in the mountains. Persian troops were descending toward the rear of the Greek position. Around them, the repaired wall, the narrow roadway, and the mountains favored defense, but the advantage of terrain was disappearing as the enemy approached from a direction the Greeks could not block. A mountain path ran above the pass, offering a way around the defenses that Leonidas had chosen. The route had been guarded by a Phocian force, but during the night, Persian troops under Hydarnes had followed the trail through the wooded heights. When the Phocians detected them, the Persians continued toward the rear of Thermopylae rather than stopping for a prolonged engagement. The narrow pass could no longer protect the Greeks from every direction. If they remained, they would soon be caught between two forces. Leonidas now faced the decision that would define the memory of the battle. Most of the Greek contingents either departed on his orders or withdrew after learning that the position had been outflanked. Herodotus, our principal ancient source, presents more than one explanation. Leonidas may have wanted to preserve the allied troops, protect their retreat, obey the expectations placed upon a Spartan king, or delay Xerxes for as long as possible. The surviving evidence does not allow us to know his exact reasoning with certainty. What is clear is that Leonidas did not remain alone with only 300 Spartans. The famous Spartan guard stayed with him, but so did about 700 Thespians, who are described as remaining voluntarily. A Theban contingent was also present, although its role and circumstances are disputed. Servants, attendants, and other supporting personnel were part of the force as well, even though later retellings often leave them outside the story. Those who stayed understood that the pass could no longer be held for long. Their task had changed. They were no longer trying to stop the Persian invasion completely. They were buying time, preserving the withdrawal of others, and forcing Xerxes to spend another morning overcoming resistance at the gateway to central Greece. Why had Leonidas led a small coalition to block the army of the largest empire of its age? And how did a military defeat become one of the most remembered battles in history? To answer that, we must return to the beginning of Xerxes' invasion. In 480 BC, Xerxes ruled an empire that stretched from the eastern Mediterranean deep into Asia. Persia was not an unorganized mass moving blindly toward Greece. It was a vast state supported by administrators, roads, regional governors, tribute systems, and supply networks. Its army drew soldiers from many peoples under imperial rule, each bringing different weapons and fighting traditions. Xerxes inherited both the power of this system and the unfinished conflict with the Greek city-states that had resisted Persian influence. A decade earlier, during the reign of Darius, a Persian expedition had been defeated at Marathon. That loss did not destroy Persian strength, but it remained a political and strategic challenge. Xerxes prepared a much larger campaign intended to punish resistance, secure the western edge of the empire, and bring more Greek cities into the Persian sphere. This was not simply a personal act of revenge. It was also an attempt to complete a project his predecessor had begun. The preparations reflected the scale of the objective. Troops were gathered from across the empire. Supply depots were established along the expected route, and food had to be collected in advance for both men and animals. Engineers built bridges across the Hellespont so the army could enter Europe. A canal was cut through the Athos Peninsula to reduce the danger to the fleet, which had previously suffered there. On land and sea, the campaign depended on coordination between infantry, cavalry, ships, transport crews, and local authorities. Ancient writers gave enormous figures for the size of Xerxes' army, but modern historians remain cautious. The exact number cannot be known with certainty. What matters is that the force was far larger and more diverse than any single Greek city could easily oppose. Its movement required planning, discipline, and an enormous logistical effort. The Greeks did not respond as one united nation because no such nation existed. Greece was divided into independent city-states that often competed with one another. Some chose to resist Persia. Others submitted, remained neutral, or waited to see which side would prevail. Even among those willing to fight, strategy was difficult to agree upon. Athens possessed the strongest naval force among the resisting states and became central to operations at sea. Sparta, with its military reputation, was expected to lead the defense on land. Representatives from several cities formed an alliance, but unity remained fragile. Every decision had to balance local interests with the survival of the wider coalition. The defenders needed positions where Persian numbers would matter less. Thermopylae offered such a place. The route into central Greece passed through a narrow corridor between mountains and the sea. In that restricted ground, only part of the Persian army could advance at one time. Cavalry had little room to operate, while heavily armed Greek infantry could hold a compact line. The plan also depended on the fleet. Greek ships took position near Artemisium to stop the Persian navy from sailing around the land defenses. Thermopylae and Artemisium were therefore connected parts of the same strategy. If either position failed too quickly, the other could become isolated. To hold this gateway, Sparta did not yet send its full army. Instead, it sent King Leonidas, 300 selected Spartan warriors, and a small coalition of several thousand Greek troops. Their mission was to hold the pass until the wider defense could be organized. The force was not expected to defeat the entire invasion alone. It was an advance guard positioned to delay Xerxes, protect the route south, and give the divided Greek alliance precious time to assemble stronger resistance behind it together. Leonidas did not march to Thermopylae with only 300 men. The 300 Spartans formed the most famous part of his command, but they were a selected royal guard within a much larger Greek force. Herodotus says Leonidas chose men who already had living sons, perhaps so their families would continue if they did not return. Sparta had not yet mobilized its entire army. Religious observances, including the Festival of the Carneia, may have limited immediate deployment, while other Greek forces were also preparing. This suggests that the expedition may originally have been intended as an advance force, expected to hold the pass until stronger reinforcements could arrive. It should not be presented with certainty as a mission designed from the beginning for 300 men to die. The wider coalition included troops from many communities: Thespians, Thebans, Phocians, Locrians, Corinthians, Tegeans, Mantineans, Arcadians, Phlians, Mycenaeans, and other Peloponnesians all contributed. Ancient totals are difficult to reconcile, but the force that first occupied Thermopylae numbered several thousand, not merely 300. Around 1,000 Phocians were assigned to guard the mountain route above the pass, while Locrian troops came from the surrounding region. The alliance was politically fragile. These cities had different interests, traditions, and reasons for resisting Persia. Some feared for their homes immediately behind the pass. Others were defending a wider coalition. Leonidas therefore commanded not a uniform Spartan army, but a temporary alliance whose soldiers had to cooperate under extreme pressure. Most of the heavy Greek infantry fought as hoplites. Their main protection was a large round shield, supported by the forearm and held by a hand grip. They carried thrusting spears, with short swords serving as secondary weapons. Bronze helmets were common, while body armor varied according to wealth, city, and individual equipment. Some wore bronze cuirasses, others used linen or composite protection, and not every soldier was equipped identically. They did not normally fight bare-chested as modern films often suggest. The hoplites' strength came from formation rather than individual display. In a close phalanx, each shield protected much of its bearer and part of the man beside him. Spears projected from the ranks while the formation moved as a connected body. If men maintained spacing, direction, and confidence, the front became difficult to break. If they lost order, the same heavy equipment could restrict movement. Thermopylae favored this method because the narrow ground reduced the danger of the line being surrounded from the front. Spartan citizens were prepared for war through a demanding system of communal education and military training. From youth, they learned discipline, endurance, obedience, and the importance of acting within a group. Adult citizens trained and ate together, reinforcing habits that supported battlefield cohesion. This did not make each Spartan an unbeatable warrior, And Sparta was not the only city capable of fielding skilled hoplites. The Thespians and other allies also fought in the same dangerous front line. The distinctive advantage of the Spartan contingent was its experience in maintaining order and providing leadership within a coalition. Leonidas was one of Sparta's 2 kings and carried both military and religious responsibilities. At Thermopylae, his most important achievement before the battle was organizing very different contingents around a simple defensive plan. He positioned the army where the pass was narrow, repaired an older defensive wall, and used the restricted ground to prevent Xerxes from deploying his whole strength. During the fighting, Greek units could be rotated so that pressure and exhaustion were shared. Leonidas did not need to destroy the Persian army. He needed to keep the coalition together and prevent the road from opening. The Persian army was also organized and experienced. It included archers, spear-bearing infantry, cavalry, imperial guards, and forces recruited from many regions. The elite unit described by Herodotus as the Immortals maintained a fixed strength by replacing losses from a reserve. Persian troops were not weak or undisciplined, and they should not be represented as monsters from modern entertainment. Their equipment and methods were designed for flexible warfare across a vast empire. At Thermopylae, however, the confined approach limited cavalry and reduced the number of infantry who could engage at once. Lighter shields and shorter spears could become disadvantages against a compact hoplite line. Leonidas had chosen a battlefield where numbers could not be used all at once. To reach central Greece, Xerxes would first have to break a wall of shields, spears, and allied soldiers holding in close formation a strip of ground between mountain and sea. Xerxes did not attack as soon as he reached Thermopylae. According to Herodotus, he waited for 4 days, expecting the Greeks to retreat. The men at the pass remained in position. On the 5th day, Xerxes ordered the advance. Famous replies later associated with the battle belong partly to ancient tradition, but the military situation was clear. Persia needed the road opened. Leonidas and the allied Greeks intended to keep it firmly closed. In 480 BC, Thermopylae looked very different from the landscape seen there today. Mountains rose on one side, while the sea and marshy coastal ground pressed close on the other. Between them ran a narrow route into central Greece. An older defensive wall crossed part of the pass, and the Greeks repaired it before the battle. The restricted ground prevented the Persian army from deploying large numbers at once. Cavalry could not easily move around the Greek front, and troops approaching the wall had to enter through a limited space. Sediment has since moved the coastline, obscuring how narrow the ancient battlefield was. The first Persian formations advanced into this corridor, expecting to drive the defenders away. Archers could send missiles toward the Greek position, but arrows alone were unlikely to decide the struggle against hoplites, protected by large shields, helmets, and body armor. Once the distance closed, the battle became a contest between formations. The Greeks held their shields together and presented rows of spears toward the approaching infantry. Only a portion of the Persian army could enter the front at one time. The soldiers behind could not easily add their weight without crowding those already engaged. The Greek coalition used the narrow space to prevent its line from being surrounded. Spartans stood in the formation, but they were not fighting alone. Other Greek troops also shared the pressure. Leonidas appears to have rotated contingents, allowing units to withdraw, recover, and return while others replaced them. Herodotus also describes a tactic in which the Spartans appeared to retreat. He says Persian troops followed, believing the Greek line was breaking. The Spartans then turned back in formation and renewed their resistance after the pursuing troops had lost some of their order. The episode fits the importance of discipline at Thermopylae, although it remains a detail preserved by an ancient author rather than an independently confirmed battlefield report. When the first attacks failed to open the road, Xerxes committed the elite force known to Herodotus as the Immortals. Their name was connected with the practice of keeping the unit at a constant strength by replacing any man who left the ranks. They were experienced imperial troops under Hydarnes, not masked or inhuman figures of modern fiction. Yet their status could not remove the restrictions of the battlefield. They entered the same confined approach as the troops before them. Persian infantry often used lighter shields and shorter spears than Greek hoplites. Those weapons were effective in the mobile warfare of the empire, especially when combined with archery and cavalry. Inside the pass, however, the longer reach and heavy protection of a compact hoplite formation created a local advantage. The Immortals could not simply move around the line, and the Greek defense remained intact. On the second day, Xerxes ordered further attacks. The Persians again tried to force the narrow route, and the Greeks continued to rotate units and hold the repaired wall. The repeated efforts placed growing pressure on both armies. Persian commanders still possessed a much larger reserve, but only limited numbers could be used at the front. The Greeks had fewer men, and every damaged shield, broken spear, exhausted soldier, or lost position was more difficult for them to replace. Their success was therefore temporary. They could continue to deny the road only while the formation remained organized and the enemy approached from one direction. Xerxes needed a way to avoid the strongest point instead of repeatedly pushing through it. The struggle on land was connected to another battle taking place near Artemisium. There, the allied Greek fleet attempted to prevent Persian ships from moving south and bypassing Thermopylae by sea. The two defensive positions supported each other. If the Persian navy broke through, the army at the pass could be isolated. If Thermopylae fell, the fleet risked losing the secure land position that supported its operations. The defense of the Hot Gates was therefore one part of a combined strategy, not a separate stand fought without regard to events elsewhere. By the end of the second day, the Persian army had still not forced its way through the narrow ground. The Greek coalition had shown that terrain, heavy infantry, unit rotation, and discipline could delay a far larger force. But delay was not victory. The defenders were losing strength, and the Persian command still had time, reserves, and the freedom to search for another route. That route already existed in the mountains. A local man named Ephialtes approached the Persians with information about a path that led around the Greek position. The road Xerxes could not open from the front might soon be reached from behind. During the second night at Thermopylae, the future of the pass was decided far above the battlefield. A mountain route, identified as the Thermopylae path, crossed the heights behind the Greek position. It offered a way around the narrow corridor where Leonidas had blocked the Persian advance. The route was known to local people and had not been ignored by the defenders. A Phocian force had been stationed there to prevent the maneuver Xerxes now needed. According to Herodotus, the man who revealed the path was Ephialtes, a local. He approached the Persian command and offered to guide troops across the mountain, apparently hoping for a reward. Because the account comes from a Greek source written decades later, some details cannot be independently confirmed. Over time, Ephialtes became more than an individual. His name became associated with betrayal in Greek memory. The Persian force chosen for the march was led by Armies and included elite troops. They began moving during the night, leaving the main army behind at the pass. The route climbed through wooded ground and difficult terrain, where darkness concealed movement. The operation required discipline and local knowledge. Its purpose was not to attack the Greek front again, but to appear behind it and make the defensive position impossible to hold. At dawn, the Phocians guarding the heights detected the approaching Persians. Surprised by the movement, they withdrew toward higher ground and prepared to defend themselves. Hydarnes did not stop for a prolonged engagement. His objective was Thermopylae, not the destruction of the Phocian unit. The Persian column continued along the mountain route and began descending toward the rear of Leonidas's army. News soon reached the Greeks below. Scouts, messengers, or deserters warned that the mountain path had been crossed. Leonidas now had limited time before the road behind him was closed. He could withdraw the entire force, escape before the Persians completed the encirclement, or keep a smaller group in place to delay the advance while the rest of the coalition moved south. Most allied contingents departed. Ancient sources do not allow us to reconstruct one certain explanation for every decision. Herodotus suggests that Leonidas dismissed the allies, but he also reports that some may have chosen to leave when the position became hopeless. The exact balance between command, agreement, and necessity remains uncertain. Why Leonidas stayed is equally difficult to answer with complete confidence. Spartan law and military honor may have shaped his choice. Herodotus also connects the decision to an oracle, suggesting that either Sparta would be destroyed or one of its kings would die. Leonidas may have believed that remaining would preserve Spartan authority within the alliance. He may also have understood that an organized rear guard could prevent the withdrawal from becoming a disorderly flight. There were practical reasons as well. The Persians were already approaching from the mountain. Moving every contingent through a restricted route before the encirclement closed may no longer have been possible. A force that stayed behind could delay pursuit, protect the departing allies, and give the Greek fleet and cities farther south more time to respond. No single explanation excludes the others. Leonidas may have acted from duty, strategy, political calculation, religious belief, and the immediate pressure of the battlefield. What remains certain is that he chose not to leave with the majority. The Spartans were not the only men who stayed. About 700 Thespians under Thermopylae are described as remaining voluntarily. Their city stood directly in the path of the invasion, and they shared the final position despite not belonging to Sparta. A Theban contingent also remained, although the circumstances of its presence are disputed. By sunrise, the defense of Thermopylae had changed completely. The narrow pass was no longer a barrier that could be held indefinitely. It had become the setting for a final delaying action, with Persian troops approaching from both front and rear. By the final morning, the purpose of the defense had changed. The remaining Greeks could no longer hope to hold Thermopylae for long. Persian troops were approaching from the front, while Hydarnes and the force that had crossed the mountain path were descending toward the rear. Leonidas and those who stayed were now fighting to delay the advance, protect the withdrawal of others, and make the final hours as costly and difficult as possible. According to Herodotus, the remaining Greeks moved forward from the narrowest part of the pass into a wider area. This decision reduced some of the protection offered by the terrain, but it allowed them to confront the Persian advance more directly. The battle became less controlled and more chaotic. The tight hoplite formation that had been so effective during the first 2 days became harder to maintain as pressure increased from several directions. Leonidas was killed during the fighting. Ancient accounts describe intense efforts around his body as the Greeks tried to prevent it from being taken. There is no reliable evidence that Leonidas fought Xerxes personally, and no need to invent a final duel between them. Xerxes remained the commander of the invasion, while Leonidas died among the soldiers still holding the field. As the struggle continued, spears were broken or lost, and men turned to their swords. Later tradition claims that when weapons failed, the defenders continued with whatever means remained available. Such details helped shape the heroic memory of Thermopylae, but the military situation was already decided. The Persians had reached the rear, the Greeks were surrounded, and the remaining force could no longer preserve an organized line indefinitely. The final defenders included the 300 Spartans, about 700 Thespians, and a Theban contingent whose exact circumstances remain disputed. Servants, attendants, and supporting personnel were also present. The Thespians, led by Thermopylae, are especially important because they are described as choosing to remain even though they were not bound by Spartan law. Later popular accounts often reduced the battle to 300 men, but the last stand was never purely Spartan. Thermopylae was a military defeat for the Greek coalition. The Persian army captured the pass and opened the road into central Greece. Athens was later evacuated and occupied. Leonidas did not stop the invasion, and the defenders did not win a tactical victory. Any accurate account must state this clearly. Yet the delay still mattered. For 2 days, a coalition of Greek forces had shown that Persian troops could be resisted when terrain, discipline, and heavy infantry were used effectively. The stand may have contributed time for wider defensive preparations and strengthened the morale of the resisting cities. However, it did not save Greece by itself. The eventual outcome of the war also depended on the Greek fleet, the battles of Salamis and Plataea, Persian supply difficulties, political decisions, and the efforts of many other communities. The memory of Thermopylae grew because later generations gave meaning to the defeat. Herodotus recorded the battle decades afterward, preserving speeches, decisions, and details that may combine history with tradition. Memorial poetry and inscriptions transformed the fallen into examples of duty and collective resistance. Sparta used the sacrifice of Leonidas and his men as a symbol of honor, while later writers and artists placed increasing attention on the 300 Spartans. As the story moved through literature, painting, nationalism, comics, and film, the coalition became easier to forget. The Thespians, Thebans, Phocians, Locrians, and other allies often disappeared from the popular image. The Persian army was also frequently simplified into an anonymous or monstrous mass, obscuring the fact that it was a disciplined imperial force made up of many peoples. The Battle of Thermopylae was not the story of 300 men defeating an empire. It was the story of a Greek coalition using terrain, discipline, and collective resistance to delay an overwhelming invasion. Leonidas and the Spartans became its most famous figures, but they did not fight alone. Their stand also preserved an example that later generations could reinterpret. Thermopylae became immortal not because the defenders won, but because they understood that they were unlikely to survive and chose to hold the pass anyway.